Hi everyone, I'm Tom Dozier, and this presentation is the misophonia reflex, how it develops and expands. Um, let's see if I can get this going. So a reflex is a physical reaction that we have where we see, hear, taste something, and then our body automatically reacts. It's involuntary, we don't control it. It's a lot of these are things that we have when we're born that are 100% genetic. You touch the side of a baby's face and they'll turn. That's a reflex. You put your finger in their mouth, touch the roof of their mouth, they'll start sucking. These are instantaneous reactions that we have at birth, and we also have a lot that develop during our life. They're acquired or conditioned reflexes. Now, when we look at misophonia, the way we normally think of misophonia is that you hear the trigger, and then you have these extreme emotions. And everyone I've talked with agrees that you cannot control those emotions. They're involuntary, they're automatic. And that there are physical reactions, but those usually come because of the emotion, fight or flight response, the tension and such. So you hear the trigger and you have an emotional reflex, and that could be called a conditioned emotional response of technically. And in our brain, this top part up here, that's our thinking brain, our cerebrum. We have the emotional center here called the limbic system, which is not truly a system. It's a number of pieces that light up when they're emotions. And then we have this autonomic nervous system down here in our brain, brainstem, and it's the lizard brain. It's the automatic stuff that keeps you alive. Well, I looked at misophonia as a reflex and thought, well, maybe we can do a counter-conditioning treatment. And so I developed what I call the neural repatterning technique, and it's got an app that automates it called the Trigger Tamer app. And this is similar to an allergy treatment, where with an allergy, you have a highly allergic to peanuts, you'll take and eat a peanut and you're going to die. So the allergy treatment is the doctor gets this super small, a millionth or a billionth of a peanut serum. They give it to the person that's had the allergy, and their body adjusts. So the way this treatment works is you take something that's 99.99% positive and a 0.01% trigger to go with it, and you intermittently give that trigger in this very positive environment, and your body will get used to it. Your whatever part of your brain is lighting up will get used to it. So the positive stimulus could be something like happy music, relaxing music. I've seen have people do this with pictures of their dog or pictures of their nephew, or just talking about life successes and things that were really positive. And then intermittently, every now and again, you get just a little bit of that trigger. And what happens is that when you have it set up right, this reflex will decay. It will die off. And what you find in treatment, what I find generally is there's a physical reflex in these treatment settings. I didn't realize that we would be that way at first, but there's this physical reflex that dies away, and usually there is no emotion during this treatment. It's just a small kind of thump to you. And once this physical reflex dies away in treatment, the real world effect is that you have a smaller physical reflex. And when you have that much smaller physical reflex, then the emotional response is much, much smaller. So this is a way of alleviating misophonia. It doesn't eliminate it. It just brings it way down. And what I discovered in this treatment really is it seems that the physical reflex is independent of the emotional reflex. That we can have the physical reflex, without having the emotional response. Here's I want to show a case study that worked really well for the person. This is their misophonia assessment questionnaire sum score, which is a measure of how severe their misophonia is, how disruptive it is to their life. And up here, she started at a 41. And after the first 2 treatments, she was down to 17. She was down to 7 after 4, but Her husband, who was our main trigger, was out of town. So this is artificially low because she wasn't being triggered by her husband, okay? And then she was at 9 and a 9, and we stopped. We should have done another assessment here at week 14 when we stopped. 4 months later, she was down to a 5, and 10 months after treatment was over, she was down to 3. So this really alleviated the distress and agony of her misophonia by greatly reducing these triggers. Okay. So what I discovered in this was that there was a physical reflex in misophonia. And it's hidden from you because the misophonia emotions are so overwhelming that they just totally dominate. And when I ask people, do you have a physical response? I often get coping responses. Oh, I cover my ears, or I push the person. Or secondary responses, I feel a lot of tight muscles, or I get hot and sweat. And 30% of the people I've worked with and had in surveys said they had report only emotion, no physical response. But with help and testing it the right way, and I can find that 95% or so have identifiable physical reflex, and most often it's a muscle jerk. The muscles in their neck or shoulders or their chest or their jaw clenches shut. I've had people. I was working with a woman, just talking with her on the phone. I said, well, let's test it. Get very relaxed, get very calm. I'm going to, she triggered a sniffing. I'm going to give you a little sniff. And I gave that little sniff, and she said, oh my goodness, I almost dropped my cell phone because her reflex was this. So and there's all kinds of combinations. I've had a couple people that have the muscles behind their ears in them, but there's muscle jerk. Now, some people have an internal reflex, stomach or intestinal constriction, nausea, esophagus constriction. I've had a couple that have an urge to urinate. Some people have it in their chest cavity. They can't really tell what it is. But there's something happening. You hear the trigger, and boom, there's this physical reflex. And we know that autonomic physical reflexes are controlled by our lizard brain. So what I believe misophonia is a two-step process. That it is most importantly the trigger stimulus, and that elicits or jerks out of you this physical reflex. And the physical reflex jerks out of you the emotional response. I mean, think about what it would be like if people came up behind you and were thumping your ear. It's not enough to make you go crazy, but after a while, it becomes extremely emotionally charged and disruptive. And what I find when I work with people to treat this physical reflex to the trigger stimulus is that the physical reflex is very consistent with the body of research on conditioned or acquired reflexes. So the emotion is with this. As I mentioned, if you come up and thump you, you're going to get tired. It's going to become upsetting. This physical muscle movement is caused by electrical impulses from our brain. So essentially, your lizard brain is going to shock you and, give you that jolt. And then from one research study they did on aggression in mice, they put 2 mice in a cage and they shocked them through the floor so that the pain came from the shock in the floor, but they turned and they attacked each other. It's called pain-induced aggression. So when you're getting jerked and you're hearing that sound, you turn toward that sound source, and that's where your aggression comes. I think everyone here would agree that, as I said before, that anger and strong emotion is not a choice when it comes to misophonia. But if you consider misophonia an assault, that you're being poked and jabbed physically, you're being shocked with a little mini taser over and over, that's an assault. And if you're assaulted, you're going to get angry. So with that misophonia as a physical assault, it's very clear that you would get angry, but you're being assaulted not by the other person, but by your little lizard brain down here in the brainstem. So when I look at treating misophonia, I look at it as an acquired, aversive, physical reflex that's controlled by the lizard brain. You hear the trigger, you have the physical reflex. Now, everything that comes after the physical reflex is very natural and normal because you've been assaulted. How do you get this? Well, this little reflex center, this autonomic nervous system, our lizard brain, it is designed to put together stimuli in the environment, sights, smells, taste, and physical reactions. So essentially, you hear the trigger, your lizard brain scans the body. Oh, there's muscles that are tightening up. Okay, next time I'm going to try to do that for you. And it looks through about maybe a 5-second window is the strongest, but a half second after that trigger, whatever your body is doing, your lizard brain wants to make you do the next time. And it does it for you, and it ends up zapping you. Now, I had some examples, and due to time, I'm not going to go through, I'll skip a few of these, but I initially thought misophonia was caused by some traumatic event. I was wrong. Things like I sat by my grandmother in church and she was sniffing, and her sniffing became my first trigger. And I had a situation where the child would argue with her sibling at the dinner table. Stop staring at me. No, you stop staring at me. And they're fighting, yelling. And he's over there going, crunch, crunch, crunch. That was her first trigger. And the muscle movements that she was doing during that arguing was her physical reflex. I apologize for clearing my throat. Sorry about that. Okay, so, another person, her brother would smack his lips. This is a very sensitive little girl. Daddy smacks his lip. Brother smacks the lip. Daddy yells at brother. Brother smacks the lip. Daddy yells at brother. So brother smacks the lip. Daddy yells. She's going, oh, oh. She's getting this, don't yell, daddy. Okay, this sensitive little girl response. Her first trigger was not her brother smacking lips at the table because that was a natural response. Her first trigger that she remembers was her brother smacking lips eating pancakes at breakfast. Because in that setting, daddy wasn't there. There was nobody to yell. And her little lizard brain heard that smack and jerked her body. I have a guy who remembers acquiring his first trigger. He remembers the night that it happened. He was laying in bed with anxiety, which has certain tense muscles associated with it, hearing his brother's nasally breathing. He couldn't go to sleep. He went to the couch, finally slept. From that night on, every time he heard that nasally breathing from his brother, it triggered him. And I know a 40-year-old man who has acquired misophonia in the last year and a half because mockingbirds built a nest outside of his window, and chirped 24 hours a day. Now he triggers to mockingbirds. So to get this reflex, you have to have a state of distress and hear some repeating sound. So one way this happens is I have this distress, but there's an irritating sound that increases my distress. So just here's my distress indicator with my hand. I've got a little distress. I hear the crunch. I hear the crunch. I hear the crunch. I hear the crunch. And now I have this extreme tight distress. And next time I hear that crunch, my lizard brain may not do that. It may just do that. The other situation is you can have tight muscles or a reflex for any reason and hear a repeating sound, and that repeating sound will create that acquired reflex in your lizard brain. So simply put, distress plus a repeating sound creates misophonia. Now, how do triggers spread? What you find is that if I have a trigger sound, that means I'm having that physical reflex. And there's any other sound or sight in the environment, any other stimulus, that I can bring those together and go away with two triggers. So examples of this is I have a trigger to chewing, and I'm seeing the jaw movement becomes a trigger. I'm at the dinner table, I'm triggering the chewing, I'm here clanking of cutlery, the clanking becomes a trigger. You know, I trigger to my father's chewing only, but he's triggering me, and I'm also noticing a little bit of my mom's chewing while I'm triggered. So mom's chewing becomes a trigger, brother's becomes a trigger, and it spreads. And you find that triggers can be very specific, discriminated, where the sound is super critical and the setting is super critical, or it can be very broad and general. So an example of a very specific trigger is a person who simply triggers only to their brother chewing, no one else. A general trigger is almost always gum chewing. The people who trigger to gum chewing generally trigger anyone, anywhere. And so it's very broad. We find that they're very complex situations, settings, contexts, and stimuli that affect these triggers. Usually it starts with one person in one setting. Then it goes to other sounds, other settings are added in over time. People, for example, a woman I worked with and I have an interview with her where she'd overcome her misophonia, but she triggered to crunching of her granddaughter, but I couldn't trigger her. Very, very much, context sensitive. But when she thought about her granddaughter and visualized her granddaughter, and then I made the sound, she triggered really strong. It's influenced by your mood, by your fatigue, sleep, hunger, and it's sensitive to the setting, the situation. And we have research that shows if you trigger in everywhere, and we do something to stop you triggering in one setting, you may still trigger in these other places. And I've seen that with the neural repatterning technique. So eliminating conditioned responses, what you have to do is you have to break the stimulus, the trigger, and the physical reaction. And if you break that intensity, what's causing the intensity, then I hear the trigger and I have a physical response. I hear it again, I have a less response, hear it again, smaller response, and it dies away. It's called respondent extinction. But misophonia doesn't go away. And so when I look at that, the reason I think that's happening is you're hearing a trigger and it's triggering you. And then there's this emotional, I don't like that. There's an emotional boost. And because of that emotional boost, the lizard brain did this, but when it checks you out at half a second, it's seeing this. And so it says, next time, zap you harder. So if we can get rid of that emotional boost, then it can go and then down and then down and down. So there's special conditions, counterconditioning this to get rid of this extra boost. And one of the things you can do is you can relax and say, it's not a threat. So you get the trigger and you go, that's not a threat. Thank you. Trigger, that's not a threat. And you can even talk to your lizard brain or talk to the muscles that are jerking, right? That's not a threat. Thank you. Thank you. Calm down. Thank you. And just, do that as a calming action. You can use muscle relaxation practice so that you can, if this is my normal reaction and I've really relaxed this muscle, then I may only go that far and start to back off. So that's a possibility. And sometimes you have a stronger reflex that can block a trigger, but that's if anyone here has a reflex that chokes your esophagus, just swallow, because swallowing will overcome that esophagus constriction. So essentially, what will happen is the response will die out to the trigger if you have a lower reflex each time in that 0 to 5 second window, but where a half second is the most critical. And the problem is that usually the misophonia, the counterconditioning is not as powerful as the misophonia reaction and the emotion that goes with it. So that the misophonia overpowers you and you're caught in that trap of reflex, emotion, and it's a loop that will not stop. Well, I would suggest that you determine your physical reflex because there are benefits to that. And if you can determine your reflex, well, here's how you determine the reflex. You want to have a single, short, soft, tiny trigger. It has to be so tiny that it doesn't kick in the emotional response. And a live trigger is often too much. So one of the things is you can record the trigger and use a sound editor to shorten it and quiet it down. That's essentially what the Trigger Tamer app does. You can use that to find out your trigger. I've contracted to create an app that will just allow you to record and just test your trigger to find out what it is. Hopefully that'll be a free app or a dollar app. It's not going to be an expensive app. And sometimes the trigger is inside of you. It's hard to tell what it is. And one person said they didn't have a trigger, and when the doctor saw him, the doctor could see that. I mean, didn't have a reflex, right? Doctor could see the reflex. Okay, so the benefits of knowing that you have what your reflex is first off, it helps you understand that with misophonia, it's your lizard brain that's hurting you, not the other person, and that can help you calm down and not be so, not have the emotional burst as much. Also, knowing that stopping that physical reflex stops the emotion, then you can work on some of these counter-conditioning techniques so that you can decay and get rid of that physical reflex. And one of the most powerful treatments you can use is progressive muscle relaxation daily. It's muscle relaxation practice so that your skill of relaxing muscles becomes more powerful than your misophonia. That could take a month to develop. So it's something you have to do. And then that calming response of thinking, okay, this isn't a threat. It's not a threat. Thank you. Oh, not a threat. Thank you. And just coming with a way of calming. So, it's my understanding that misophonia is this two-step process. I hear the trigger. I feel the reflex. Instantly upon feeling the reflex, I have this extreme emotion and fight or flight and all these other responses. If this is correct, and as Buzz Lightyear said on Toy Story, he was asked, "Are you sure?" He says, "I'm Buzz Lightyear. I'm always sure." And I'm sure that this is what's happening from the number of people I've worked with and what I've seen. This will affect how you treat your misophonia, how you view your misophonia. And this, if it is correct, should also affect what kind of research we do on misophonia to find cures, really cures, right? Effective treatments that totally eliminate the debilitating condition of misophonia. So thank you very much. I've gone 6 minutes over schedule. Marcia, do we break or do you have some questions?
Well, why don't we just take like 2 questions? That was so good, Tom. You've come a long way, baby. So let's have 2 really super good, great questions. Yes.
If you cure one trigger, will you cure all of your triggers?
No. And in fact, even when you have triggers that are I'm going to cut my piece down. Even when you have triggers that are very closely associated, like a crunch sound and a jaw motion, if the first young guy that I worked with, we took out his crunching auditory trigger, and yet he still couldn't eat dinner at the table because of the jaw movement. He came back and we worked on the jaw movement trigger, got rid of that, and then he could eat at the table. So if you take out one trigger, you don't take them out all. You got to take them out individually. But if in the process of taking out 1 or 2 triggers, you can get rid of some of this personal family disruption, it can make a big difference to just take out 1 or 2 triggers. And it can let you know for sure your physical reflex, how to relax through it. And I have had a case where the people have kind of applied it to real life and then taken down other triggers. So, but no, it doesn't take out other triggers. I'm going to turn my mic back, or speaker up. Next question.
Well, I'll ask a question. Tom, can you tell us just briefly about the Misophonia Treatment Institute?
Okay. You're looking at the home office of the Misophonia Treatment Institute. And the Misophonia Treatment Institute is me trying to pull together people who are interested and concerned, trying to promote research, other practitioners who will let me to help advertise that they're available. I'm open to any and all kind of accumulation of information. I'm the self-appointed director of the Misophonia Treatment Institute. And my goal is, once again, education, awareness, research, which I have a real trouble with research because I'm not tied to an academic institution. But again, I'm trying to promote at least my own research on this condition, even if it's not publishable, and treatment. So it's kind of a short-term mission. I don't plan on doing this forever, but right now I'm donating almost all of my time, and the income from the people I work with and such covers the expenditures for things like the Trigger Tamer app and the website and the video developments on education on misophonia. And if you haven't seen the videos that I have on misophoniatreatment.com, I would recommend you go there and go to the misophoniatreatment.com/videos, and I have a list kind of in priority order down of videos that explain misophonia, and some of them may be very helpful to let you explain misophonia to a spouse or a family member or someone who's very close to you. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. So thank you very much.